Hello, everyone. Welcome into another edition of the Wolverine podcast here on Monday, June 24th. Anthony Broome here with Clayton Sayfie as we move into the next round of our positional previews. Today, we'll be talking about Michigan's wide receivers, 9 scholarship guys in the room entering the 2024 season. We'll talk about them. We'll discuss their roles on the team. And depending on our time towards the end here, take a few questions from the fort as well. Clayton, welcome back in, sir.
Great to be here. Talking wideouts, a huge position group for Michigan this year, so should be good. And we got some pretty wild questions too, so should be a good show.
We do. A few of them will not be read on the show, but always wild, always an interesting time. We are brought to you today, of course, by the 2024 Michigan Football Preview, which has been sent off to the printer. It will mail out in mid-July, 160 action-packed pages. It's a must-have for all you guys. You're going to be the most well-read Michigan fans there are. If you order our football preview magazine, we've got positional breakdowns, freshmen most likely to play, position by position looks at the roster, feature articles, final evaluations of the 2019 recruiting class, a roundtable with national college football experts giving their thoughts on U of M, and so much more. It's great. The cover is amazing. Will Johnson, our cover athlete this year. Nice blue skies, maybe emblematic of the blue sunny skies ahead for Michigan football under Sharon Moore. Head on over to the WolverineOnDemand.com and get your copy today. Also, we're brought to you by ourselves. 4th of July coming up, and we will push now what Clayton Sayfie calls the best deal in America. Joining the Wolverine using our promo code UM1 for 2 months of premium access to our site for only $1. And right now, again, it's a great deal regardless of when you get in on it. But with all our stuff that's happening with recruiting right now, the lead up to the 2024 season, I mean, you are getting almost as much bang for your buck as you possibly could with this deal at the moment. EJ Holland, our team, doing an amazing job right now over at the Wolverine on recruiting and all other things that our staff covers. So use that promo code today. Clayton, we've done quarterbacks. We have discussed wide receivers. Today, we move into the pass catcher portion of our show, namely the wide receivers. We will do the tight ends the next time that we do a show, but 9 scholarship guys to talk about. And if you guys have listened to this series the last few weeks, you know that we've started with most experienced in terms of class level down through the guys that are coming in as freshmen. So we will start now with a graduate who has played the most college football in this room, but none of it at Michigan. CJ Charleston, 6 foot, 190 pounds, spent his career at Youngstown State. Redshirted in 2019, but had 5 catches for 105 yards and then 7 catches for 112 yards during the COVID season in 2020. Last year, he had 33 catches for 503 yards and 4 touchdowns and is now a member of the Michigan football program as a guy that, I think we talked about this coming out of the spring, transfer portal needs. What did you need at the position? And certainly depth at wide receiver is a big part of that. And Charleston, to me, looks like a guy that, again, I think that we're going to talk a lot more prominently about a few other guys that we discuss on this episode, but feels like maybe a Dalen Baldwin type wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5, experienced guy. What do you make of CJ Charleston's impact on this room?
Yeah, I mean, he's just a massive question mark, I guess, is how I would label him at this point, because it's a huge jump to come up from the FCS level. You mentioned Dalen Baldwin. He was more of a prominent force on his team at Jackson State before he made the transition. And even then, he was kind of a backup player for Michigan on a team that didn't have elite receivers. I mean, Roman Wilson was a sophomore. Cornelius Johnson was, a junior that year or a senior or junior, 2021. So, you didn't have this elite receiving core yet. He still didn't step right in and become a starter, but he had a valuable role on that team. They needed another body in there. Ronnie Bell goes down early in that season, and it was huge to be able to have a guy that, if you needed him, could step up. Roman Wilson got hurt in the middle of that year with a hand injury. So it's not to say that he's not a nice pickup for Michigan, but, he was 3rd on his team in catches. He was 3rd on his team in receiving yards. He had 4 touchdown catches last year, whereas Dalen Baldwin led his team in all those categories. So it's a little bit of a different type of player, I think, especially because he's dealt with injury in his career. In 2022, he missed the whole year due to an Achilles injury. But as you said, I mean, he has experience, and that definitely counts for something. As Ron Bellamy has talked about, he is, and I don't have the snap counts in front of me, but he may have more snaps against Ohio State than anybody else at wide receiver on Michigan's roster. He also has played at Michigan State. So, he knows what it's like to go into those two buildings, and, Michigan's not going to have to go to Michigan State this year, but they're going to have to go down to Columbus at the end of the year. And if he can make a catch, and gain 8 yards or make a first down catch in a big game, he will prove to be a valuable pickup. I'm not saying that's, the only thing that he's going to do all year, but he certainly has experience and somebody maybe that you could rely on if called upon. But it's a big question mark to me because that transition is just different for everybody.
Yeah, I think when it comes to the topic of Michigan fans wanting them to add wide receiver help in the portal, certainly there's a much more intriguing guy that we'll get to in a little bit here. But, everyone everyone sets their sights on the top guy that's out there. Like, oh God, is there a way that Michigan could figure out its NIL where you bring in a Keandre Lambert-Smith? Like, that was never going to happen. But a guy like Charleston rounds out the depth in the room. It's more, to me, where he fits in is more about where he's, who he's in competition with, which maybe is where we move into the next guy here on the list. Peyton O'Leary as a senior, who has been a guy that for a few years has felt like has been, I'll put the word star in quotation marks behind the scenes. Jim Harbaugh at one point called him Cooper Kupp-like for his ability to kind of catch everything that was thrown at him. He's got a wide catch radius, 6'3", 200 pounds. Someone who I think probably factors into the X receiver battle that, Amorion Walker, we'll talk about him in a bit, will factor into. Again, another guy that's sort of in that wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5 mold, has been huge for them on the scout team, but never really has, there's been, I don't want to say there's been overhype on him, but, the stuff, and Jim Harbaugh would, he had a tendency to talk about every player like they were going to be an All-American or they were going to be, this great player. And some guys just are what they are. And I think that's kind of what Peyton O'Leary is. I think he can help provide some quality depth in a competition. But the fact that, first off, I mean, they went through all of spring ball with only 5 scholarship guys there to begin with, which, that's its own issue in its own. But the fact that they did kind of recruit the way they did in the portal seems to suggest that he just kind of is what he is here, right?
Well, I mean, I know you had a lot of experience at wide receiver last year. Both those guys are gone, Cornelius Johnson and Roman Wilson. But, this is a guy that played 38 offensive snaps last year. He did earn some late in the year, including a couple in the Alabama game. But, he never has carved out a prominent role for himself. And you could say, I mean, most walk-ons that then become a scholarship guy, and if they ever do impact, usually it's probably in the back half of their career. So it's not to say it's not possible. He's looked very good in spring games. I think the last year, it was pretty clear that, one of the reasons why he looked so good was, one, his chemistry with Davis Warren is outstanding. I think that's pretty clear. So if Davis Warren is the guy for Michigan, I think these two roommates, could definitely have a connection. But 2, I think Amorion Walker being the guy that he picked on over and over, and Davis Warren picked on as well in the 2023 spring game. That was a big reason, why Peyton O'Leary was one of the standouts. So to me, it's right now he just hasn't done it in games, hasn't earned that opportunity in games. But he's another person you can rely on. Like, he knows what to do out there. They clearly trust him in that regard, putting him in the Rose Bowl for a couple snaps. He will block. And, he will catch the ball, like you said, if it comes to him. But there's a lot more that goes into the position, I think.
Yeah, I don't want to spend too much time on just as we didn't with Charleston. Peyton O'Leary, yeah, I mean, we're talking about guys that are going to compete for wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5, maybe less than that. So to me, I think the next most interesting guy, and maybe the most interesting guy in this room as you move into the junior class, is Tyler Morris, who to me is a lot of what he does is kind of in that same mold of at least from a body type, from a traits perspective. he's in that Ronnie Bell mold. He's in that Roman Wilson type of mold. Testing numbers aside, I think he kind of looks like what they've had there in terms of number one guys. Last year, because as you said before, Michigan was super experienced at wide receiver. Didn't see him a ton, at least from a production standpoint, but he did not have a game with back-to-back receptions. But he saved his signature play, and maybe the thing that we talk about these plays late in the year that kind of serve as a springboard into the next season. I mean, his 38-yard touchdown against Alabama in the Rose Bowl, that was eye-opening because I don't know, like we've always known that Tyler Morris is a guy that he's a good route runner, good hands, chain mover. But to watch him kind of knife up the field and then outrun the Alabama secondary, which regardless of, how many first rounders or how many draft picks are back there, probably one of the most athletic secondaries you'll see at this level of the sport. That was eye-opening to me. And I think that he is going to be a guy that can be a safety valve, out of the slot, maybe play some Z receiver as well. Certainly they'll need him to play a bit on the, a lot on the outside, but, and maybe his speed shouldn't have been a surprise to me, given that he was, a track star in high school as well. But to me, this is a guy that has clear all Big Ten potential. The volume, I think, is going to help him a lot. And I don't really have any concerns about what he's going to bring to the table.
You know who wasn't surprised that he was able to score on that play? Tyler Morris.
Yeah.
He said that maybe other people were surprised. I've talked to him about that play a couple times, but he has believed in himself. And you said it, a springboard is a great way to put it because and they talked about this when you rewatch the spring game, and it was the broadcast team about how his roommates, who is Will Johnson and Colston Loveland, naturally, like the rest of us, they're watching that Rose Bowl game a lot, but it would come on. And Tyler Morris told me he would come downstairs and the Rose Bowl's on. And if it was that 3rd and 10 from the 38-yard line, the plus 38-yard line, he, every time he saw it, it just kind of kept his confidence up. And he's kind of rode that into this next season. He's become a leader in the room, which has been huge for these guys. He was saying this spring that, he's told a guy like Semaj Morgan, like, hey, we love what you did last year, but we need more out of you. And, that's something Tyler Morris wouldn't have said a year ago because you had other leaders there, but he stepped up in that role for them. And I think he's going to be the main target on this team. I think whether it's him, Colston Loveland, that remains to be seen. But from a wide receiver perspective, that's going to be him. And, maybe this is because of Cornelius Johnson and just who he was or something else. I think it's maybe more the offense, but I think the guy who's not always lined up on the outside actually ends up having more production for Michigan traditionally. You see it with Ronnie Bell, who had that role. You saw it last year with Roman Wilson, who became the go-to guy from, everyone thinks that the number one receiver has to be the outside receiver when a lot of times it's harder to get the ball to the guy on the outside. It's easier to get it to a guy playing that Z position or in the slot, when they go with 11 personnel. So Tyler Morris is going to be in those situations quite a bit. And then I just like how he comes up big on big downs. I have it here that 8 of his 13 receptions last year came on 3rd down. 135 of his 197 receiving yards came on 3rd down. And his lone touchdown of the year, fittingly, as we said, came on 3rd and 10. Just a massive play to put Michigan up 13-7 in the Rose Bowl. Special teams couldn't make it 14-7, but that was a huge play late in the second quarter to go into halftime with that situation where you felt good about how Michigan was able to play. Now, the offense didn't really do much until the end of the game in the second half, but they were able to figure it out. And sometimes it's not always the play at the end of the game that you have to, that determines the game. It's that 3rd and 10 early on, and he was a big part of that. So, like you said, volume, it's just going to only increase what he can do. Like 2 years ago, Roman Wilson got 20 or 30 targets. Last year, Tyler Morris got 21. And then last year, once he gets 66 targets, Roman Wilson goes off and has a big year. 67 targets, excuse me. So I think it's going to be the same thing for Tyler Morris. He's got that potential.
He does. He would be the guy I have as wide receiver 1 heading into this year. Junior class, moving on to Amorion Walker, who wide receiver turned cornerback, turned wide receiver. We know his story at this point. We've talked about him a few times in the last several weeks. Transferred to Ole Miss, announced during the spring portal period that he would go back to Michigan, confirmed it was to play wide receiver. So he's back there. And the way that they talk about him, you think that he's going to be DeAndre Hopkins or that he's going to be Jamar Chase. Now, let's tap the brakes on that. But we do know he's a guy with rare athletic traits, rare enough to where, I mean, Jim Harbaugh was hyping this guy up as, he could be special at cornerbacks. It turns out didn't really quite click there. And now they have an opportunity for him to be in a position at the school he wants to be at, in a position he wants to play. And, if a guy like Tyler Morris is going to be, play a little bit of the Z, play in the slot, Amorion Walker is an outside receiver. He is, a potential home run threat. He's a guy that you want to try and get the ball to down the field. Now, part of me wonders if the clock on his development sort of starts over, given that it will be the third, it's the second different position he's played, but 3 years in college, 3 different kind of plans for him. He's still, to me, kind of a lotto ticket, but with his athleticism, with his, the traits that he brings to the table, and with this kind of renewed opportunity, it feels like, the chemical mixture is there for maybe a breakout, or maybe he is just depth and he's competing with Charleston and Peyton O'Leary. But, of all the guys in this room, he might be the most interesting.
Yeah, one, you need a quarterback to get him the ball down the field too. And he's got to prove that he can go up and make a contested catch, right? I mean, he's not going to come in and just be Nico Collins right away, where those 50-50 balls were 80-20 balls. He's got to work on that. He's got to prove he can do that. Otherwise, it's not going to be worth it to throw the ball there. And again, a lot of that comes down to, whoever your quarterback is, what they can do with the football and how they can spin it. But, it's funny because Amorion Walker, you kind of went into it there. His freshman year, he was a guy that was recruited by some schools as a defensive back. Michigan said, hey, you can play wide receiver. And he was pretty highly touted as a 4-star recruit. He comes in, plays wide out, plays a little DB at the end of the year, then makes the full-time switch last season. Then he's kind of learning, it was all about how he's adjusting and how he's learning. And then this spring, he spends it at Ole Miss as a defensive back. But now, maybe he's going to just take off now that he's comfortable. Like, he knows the system offensively for Michigan. He's really familiar with Ron Bellamy, who was his primary recruiter, a fellow Louisiana native. He knows Kirk Campbell. Like, maybe this is where he takes off. I do wonder about his physicality. It was a problem, or, at least something that he had to improve last year as a DB and probably as a freshman wide receiver. But he's 6'3", 180 pounds is what he was listed at last year. He compares himself to T. Higgins, but T. Higgins is like 30 pounds heavier than him. And T. Higgins, can play physically and, come down with contested catches. So that would be a fantastic way that Amorion Walker could turn out. But, there's a lot of steps I think he needs to take to get there.
Yeah. Again, the question I have about him is I think physicality is right at the top of that list, because if you're going to see the field at Michigan, you're going to have to block your ass off, and they're only going to put you on the field if you block your ass off. And, Walker is, even now, 3 years into college, just to kind of, that wiry frame, looks like a track athlete, but, they need him to, if he's going to be anything more than a lotto ticket, they're going to need him to play a little more physically. So we'll see what happens there. I mean, the range of outcomes for him is extremely wide, especially given that, there are a lot of snaps up for grabs at wide receiver. Moving on to the sophomores now. Kendrick Bell, someone else who maybe that's the theme of this room, is interesting. Obviously, Ronnie Bell's brother came in as an athlete. I think, you can correct me if I'm wrong. He got his first crack, maybe seeing if he could play quarterback, but now firmly in the wide receiver room, and a guy, you've talking to a few people that are kind of close to everything at Michigan. They think he could be a player, someone who could step up. Obviously, his brother had a much more immediate impact upon arriving on campus, but didn't see any game action last year. But that could and probably will change this year, I would think. Like I said, he had a wow play in the spring game, 42-yard catch from Davis Warren. To me, I think that I don't know where I'd handicap him in terms of what the wide receiver power rankings look like heading into fall camp, but he might be a sneaky guy to keep an eye on.
I agree. I have been impressed with the way he looked in the spring game, and I know he burned, some walk-on DBs on his touchdown, but it looked good. He came down with the catch. It was a nice throw by Davis Warren into the wind on a windy day at the big house, and we know it can kind of swirl down there a little bit. But he's another one of those guys that can play outside for you, 6'2", 180 pounds, who is somebody similar to Amorion Walker, where last year was kind of a transition for him. He did come in as a quarterback. Then he moves to wide receiver last year, but he wasn't going to get much time. And, he had to work behind the scenes. It looks like he's a lot more confident. He looks bigger to me as well this year. So, he could be somebody that they could throw out there outside, because like we said, CJ Charleston's kind of a question mark. Amorion Walker's kind of a question mark. Peyton O'Leary is kind of a question mark. And so I guess you throw Kendrick Bell in that category, which makes him a candidate to make an impact this year. He's got to be able to block. I don't know, how he does in that regard. I would imagine being a Bell, he'll be just fine there. And as Ron Bellamy said a few weeks ago on John Jansen's podcast, the goal is now for Kendrick Bell to not be Ronnie Bell's brother anymore. It's to be Kendrick Bell. Make your own name for yourself. And, I would never bet against somebody in that family. Like Kendrick Bell is going to be good at Michigan at the very least. I don't know when that's going to happen, if it's going to be this fall or not, but he's going to be good at some point, and it might just be this fall. So he's definitely a wild card and somebody that could break out.
You saying the Bells are the next, or the Glasgows, or what are some of the other families that just have the conveyor belt?
I think so. Glasgow's, yeah. I'm not going to put them in the Wissert category yet, but you need at least one other brother too to come through. They might have a younger brother. I don't know about that. But to me, Ronnie Bell was never not going to succeed, even though he was a 2-star. This is all hindsight bias. But now we have that proof, and his brother's here, and he's already done some good things in his year on campus. So I'm excited to see what he can do.
I tend to agree with you. It's just a matter of, I don't know if it's this year or not. Maybe this year, certainly 2025. He's going to be in the mix. Already probably is in the mix. Moving on, a couple other sophomore wide receivers with a lot of intrigue. Talk about how interesting is the word of the day around here. Fredrick Moore, maybe of all of these guys, the biggest quote unquote stock riser of the offseason. I think if I had to, if we were putting out a depth chart today of what things look like against Fresno State, I think he's probably the guy that starts on the outside in that Cornelius Johnson role. Earned the trust of the staff early on last year, right? Appearing 13 games, 4 catches, 32 yards, and was 5th on the team in wide receiver snaps with 107. And I think the thing that, it's been encouraging about me, or about Moore when it comes to at least how I see him, is every time that, and again, we don't get to see practices and such, but JJ McCarthy at Pro Day, Fred Moore's running routes for him. Fred Moore's helping him, get warmed up and all of those types of things. He is a guy that I think gets in extra work wherever he can. I think another guy that was one of the stars of the spring game. He had 2 catches for 76 yards. One of those being a 48-yard touchdown pass from Davis Warren, whose name has come up a lot today. They used him on an end-around play. To me, I think he has all the tools to be, a number 2 in this system. Certainly a guy who can play on the outside. They like to cross-train their guys as well, so could see him a bit in the slot. But, I think the fact that the additions that they made in the transfer portal this year, to me, point that they're pretty confident with their top 3, who I think is Tyler Morris, Fred Moore, and then the next guy we'll talk about, Semaj Morgan. I think Fred Moore is, all the guys in this group, probably the guy you'd probably choose for a breakout candidate.
Yeah, I agree. He's right up there. And I think his dedication stands out. You mentioned it with him being there, running routes for JJ McCarthy at Pro Day, that sort of thing. One of my favorite stories from talking to Fred Moore last summer was that before the spring game, in which he impressed in that spring game too, back in 2023, he stayed with his brother who was in town at an apartment that he was, renting, or maybe it was Airbnb or something like that. And the night before, him and his brother are going through walkthroughs in there. He's visualizing what it's going to be like. He's going over the plays with them. Like, this guy, he was preparing like it was a game. Now, if it was a real game, they'd be staying over at a hotel in Ann Arbor. But, the fact that he was, kind of doing that and realizing that, and he said, I wanted to open people's eyes. And I think he did in that spring game, because he came in as a pretty unheralded recruit. There were mixed reviews on, even his speed, which looks really good. People weren't exactly sure how fast he was. He's proven to be, pretty fast. It seems like he's really dedicated to his route running. Semaj Morgan has said he's got Jerry Jeudy-like route running ability. So Jerry Jeudy, one of the fastest guys in the NFL, wide receiver wise. So I think that he's going to have a role. I do wonder about getting off the line, being able to block. He's very slender as well, similar to Amorion Walker in terms of my concern about what he's going to be able to do in that regard. But I think he's probably someone that plays a similar role to Tyler Morris last year, where he's on the field a decent amount, maybe doesn't get all the targets, but is going to come up with some big catches.
Let's move on to the aforementioned Semaj Morgan, who I think has the most maybe star power is the word of the guys in this room. I think that, last year they found, the one thing you could always say about Jim Harbaugh and freshmen is that he felt that if there was a guy that could help them in any type of role, they'd be on the field. And Semaj Morgan was one of those guys. He had the most production of any of Michigan's returning receivers this year, 22 catches, 204 yards, 2 touchdowns. He had 4 rushes for 67 yards and another 2 touchdowns. And, when you think about the guys in that room last year, the guys on that offense last year, the fact that he played even that type of role on a national championship team, I think that's pretty encouraging for what he projects to long-term. If anyone ever watched him play at West Bloomfield, it's pretty apparent he was the guy that was going to succeed. They put him everywhere. He was playing nickel. He was playing deep safety. He was returning kicks. He was playing wide receiver. He was playing running back. He was playing wildcat quarterback. I think he can do pretty much whatever you ask him to do on a football field. And he takes to it too. I mean, he's an extremely coachable guy, an interesting personality, great kid, amazing family. But there's a lot more that Michigan can kind of unlock with him, both as a returner, both as a wide receiver, just as an offensive weapon in general. When you look at Tyler Morris, you look at Fred Moore, and you look at Semaj Morgan's skill set, I walk away from this, not just this exercise, but this offseason in general, feeling pretty good about what they have at wide receiver at the top of the depth chart.
In him doing more, I think is a huge key. And when we talked to him, you and I, a couple of weeks ago, he said that, he doesn't want to be a role player. And I don't think he was unhappy with his role last year as a role player. But, there were experienced players ahead of him that were proven and that got the job done when it mattered most. I mean, think of the huge catches throughout the careers of Cornelius Johnson and Roman Wilson. And Semaj Morgan wants to now do that. He wants to be one of the guys that is doing that. And, I wouldn't rule out him. You mentioned West Bloomfield. I went and watched him play once, and, he has some big catches down the field, coming down with it over defenders. And he is smaller, but he has that ability too. And, I wouldn't rule him out being somebody who can stretch the field for Michigan. You don't have to be the biggest guy or a Nico Collins type of player to come down with catches down the field. If you can create enough separation, like I think Semaj Morgan can, then you can be a target down there as well. But that is the question with him right now. And that is the goal, is to expand his role. If you look at his numbers, 14 of his 22 catches last year came behind the line of scrimmage. They clearly wanted to get him the ball in space, let him make defenders miss, use his, elusiveness in the open field. 18 of his 22 catches came within 10 yards of the line of scrimmage, and then only 4 beyond, or 10 or more yards beyond the line of scrimmage. So I think he wants to be somebody who can make the catch over the middle and run, or, even on the outside, something deeper. So that is going to be huge for him, because I think people are going to be keying on him a little bit more. And if Michigan doesn't have quite the pass game that it did last year, which I don't expect them to be the same without J.J. McCarthy there, then I think it's going to be a little bit more clogged up near the line of scrimmage where Semaj Morgan does a lot of his damage.
Yeah, it's the ball skills for me. You see like his height, weight, whatever. He plays much bigger than that. I mean, he's a guy who can high point a football down the field. He'd adjust to a ball in the air. I mean, think of, was it his first career touchdown that J.J. McCarthy threw to him where he kind of had to adjust and make that back shoulder catch? I mean, he's a total package. I have no concerns about what he can do on a football field. It's just an application of that more, unlocking that type of skill set. I want to put the freshmen kind of in one basket here. Channing Goodwin and Amorion Stewart, both of those guys, summer enrollees. Got to be honest, I don't really see either of them making an impact this year. Channing Goodwin was a 3-star recruit, number 537 player in the country, actually the son of former Michigan standout Jonathan Goodwin.
Who's now with the Chargers, by the way, on staff.
Who's now with the Chargers. It's poetry. It rhymes. Yeah. It's all cyclical.
And Jim Harbaugh coached him at the Niners. So this is, if he's got Jim Harbaugh's stamp of approval, which he does, he signed up to play for Jim Harbaugh. I like this kid quite a bit.
Yeah. The one thing I'll say about Goodwin, EJ has always been a fan of his skill set. I kind of defer to him on the guys I'm not sure about. Someone who certainly has a chance to outperform his recruiting ranking. Amorion Stewart, kind of in that same mold as a guy that could outperform his ranking, though he was a 4-star guy, number 351 player nationally. Similar skill set to what Semaj Morgan does. He's explosive. He's a guy who's shown some good things as a kick returner. Maybe he can factor in there, but to me, with the wide receivers in general, I don't have a lot to say on them because I tend to think these two guys, it'll be more of a red shirt type of deal. But do you have any thoughts on Channing Goodwin or Amorion Stewart?
Yeah, I think both are red shirt. I agree with you. And, it's kind of interesting because they had more proven commodities at receiver last year, but they also kind of had this like void in between, in the depth spots. And, a couple freshmen that we've mentioned played somewhat of a role. Fredrick Moore, you said it, fifth most wide receiver snaps on the team. He was in, at different points more early on in the season. And then Semaj Morgan obviously earned more and more time as the year went on and actually had, 4 huge touchdowns throughout the course of the year. And has that game-breaking ability, also impacted on special teams. So I think special teams are red shirt for these guys because I do think, weirdly, Michigan has more guys in that in-between area where you're not a freshman, you're also not a starter, but we trust you. And I think the 2 transfer pickups, if you count Amorion Walker as one of those, is a reason why. And the experience of some of the other guys, at least being in the program, Peyton O'Leary, guys like that, plays a factor into that.
Well, let's round out this room conversation. We'll take a few questions after this. Let me round it out by asking this. I mean, I've said I like what they have here. I think that there are the bones of a really good wide receiver room. At the same time, is there anything to you about this room that I don't want to say gives you pause, but just kind of holds you back a little bit? For me, I would love just to have one more proven guy with legitimate college production on the roster. But other than that, I mean, in order to have a guy that becomes that, eventually someone has to start out somewhere. They're just all starting out in this kind of even playing field now. So any concerns there?
Yeah. I mean, my concern is that too, that we just haven't seen it. But at the same time, I trust that at the very least, Tyler Morris is going to be able to take on a much bigger role. I think Semaj Morgan is going to be able to take on at least a bigger role in terms of like doing more of what he's already done. I think he'll be able to expand that, but talking at the very least here, he'll be able to do more of what he's done as kind of a guy you get the ball out in space to. And then the other guys are questions. Which guys are going to step up? I would like to think they would have enough that somebody's going to step up, whether it's Fredrick Moore or CJ Charleston or Amorion Walker or Peyton O'Leary, but we just don't know it until we see it. And it could come down to, they may trust you out there, but if you don't make the play when you need to on third down to keep the offense on the field, then you don't know when that you're going to get that opportunity to do that again. And it's going to determine the ceiling of this offense if they can stay on the field. So there's so much that goes into it. We talk to people close to the program, and I think they're waiting to fall camp to see what they have here. You got to build chemistry with the quarterbacks. You don't know who that's going to be yet. That's a huge part of this as well. So I think we're going to know a lot more about these guys once they get a little bit more settled in.
All right, well, let's move on to the questions and answers portion of this show. Clayton, why don't you reach into the grab bag? You teased people with a lot of interesting questions, so I'll let you be the guy that reaches in this week.
Okay. We can start with a quick one from Sasquatch616, who says, where does this recruiting class land on signing day? I feel like they're trending towards the top 10 class. I mean, they got all the momentum in the world right now. I feel like everybody's talking about Michigan recruiting, and they've definitely turned a corner in terms of what they're able to do, what they're able to offer, and recruits confidence in what this staff can do for them.
Yeah, it feels like top 10 is, I don't ever want to say likely because things can change quickly, but there are people that would love to see Michigan recruit top 5 classes, top 6, 7, 8 classes. And you can count me among them. Like, it's just more interesting to cover. But, with the way that it looks like Michigan wants to build this thing and the way that Sherrod Moore is building this thing, I think that if you can be the program that kind of nails the transfer portal and then keeps bringing in top 10 classes, with a lot of guys that really, I know maybe a little lower rated, but are still quote unquote your guys that you've shown an aptitude to be able to develop. And, from a culture perspective, from a roster perspective, from a philosophy perspective, I think that's going to keep them in the conversation. So to me, yeah, I think that this looks like a top 10 class, and we'll see what the upshot of it is. But, it's the old, what the old olive in the jar theory, right? Like, one of them pops and they all pop. So it was a bit of I won't say turbulent few months, just a little bit slow. Got to remember this staff was, especially on the defensive side of the ball, starting over from scratch. I think they've done a really nice job here, and it's going to be a busy week with, you don't want to plant a flag on any certain guy, but because things could date themselves quickly, but that's where we're at. So.
We'll edit this out if it doesn't happen, but Chase Taylor, linebacker, is going to commit in 8 minutes. So this will be out after he commits, so we're not spoiling it. But yeah, that's how busy it is. We have a commitment in 8 minutes.
We're planning a show around a commitment dropping is basically
exactly
what we're doing.
We're planning everything these days around a commitment drop. Every time you check your phone, there's a new commitment for Michigan. So they are absolutely pulling right now.
Yeah, you're in the future. We're broadcasting from the past, but also projecting the future. So
that's too
kind of
confusing.
Interesting dynamic. I know. What else you got? I think we got time for 2 more, Clay.
Sasquatch also says, if you're a flavor of ice cream, what flavor would you be and why? I go Neapolitan. I love all people. Everyone, I'm a man of many different traits. I think I'll go with that.
If I was a flavor, see, it's different than what your favorite flavor is.
True.
I would say Rocky Road because marshmallows are sweet. Definitely have a sweet side to me, but also nuts there. A little nutty. Could be a little nutty at times. I feel nutty. So
that's quite the answer. Bloomer says, if you had a hawk, would you name it Tua? Like Tua Tagovailoa? I don't understand that one.
Certainly. It's just like my favorite or my second favorite NFL quarterback behind Jared Goff. And he's only my second favorite because he's a lefty.
That's fair. Lefties got to stick together.
That's right.
You want me to keep reading these?
Yeah, let's rapid fire it, I guess.
I like this one. DJ Wolverine, what commit from this past week are you most excited about? Did Brady Hart commit on last Monday? It might technically be just over a week from when we're recording this. It was either Monday or Tuesday. I can't even remember because there's a commit every 2 seconds.
It was actually Tuesday. 6/18.
It was Tuesday, so it's within a week. Okay. He's got to be it for me, but a lot of these kids feel like a great fit. Donovan Johnson, the running back, who was a 5-star at one point, was a top 3 back in the country in 2025, then tore his ACL, but is cleared now. And if he has a big senior year, he may end up a 5-star again. Michigan's got him in the fold. They have multiple running backs in this class. Jasper Parker also in there. But Brady Hart, just if anyone missed it, the quarterback, top 100 quarterback out of the state of Florida in the 2026 class, so next cycle. But he's one of 7 currently top 100 quarterbacks Michigan has signed since the On3 industry ranking goes back to 2004. So pretty significant. All those guys started games in their past. So I'd project Brady Hart is in that mold and has a huge impact on the future of what this program looks like.
There's also a non-zero chance, not to out anyone, that there's at least one person in our listening/viewing audience that their password for everything is like Brady_Hart 97. Like
they're changing it right now.
You better change it right now because I just figured it out. I cracked the code. Yeah, I mean, it's Brady Hart. Not to get too like nerdy about it, but when you have a 15-year-old or a 16-year-old that's already 6'5" and closing in on 200 pounds, and there's upshot for him to grow into his body a little more and put a little more zip on his throws, like that's like fringe 5-star stuff if he continues to get better. So that's something to be excited about. I really do. I mean, I wrote about it last week where Kirk Campbell is kind of in the last 18 months or so, like completely reshaped this Michigan quarterback room heading into the future. And, a lot of what he is, a lot of what he does as an assistant, people are going to judge what he does this year and bang the gavel on what that means for what he is. But in terms of roster building, in terms of recruiting, I think he's done an outstanding job. Brady Hart is a hell of an ad, and it's good on them to get him in this early. So
I agree. I think Kirk Campbell has the potential to be a superstar football coach in general. And the fact that Michigan has, and what he's done in a year and a half on and off the field has been fantastic. Here is DJ Wolverine again saying, do you find it funny that Michigan has 2 running backs with more completions versus Ohio State than Ohio State's quarterbacks have combined against Michigan? I do find that funny. He also wonders when the War of 1812 was. We're not stupid. I think that was in the 1920s or 30s, maybe. Joking, of course. How stupid do people think we are? I am dumb, but I'm not that dumb.
I mean, I buck the Michigan man trend of being like a war and history buff. So, but I'm not a real Michigan man anyway, so it just doesn't matter.
It was in 1812, just for the record. And then maybe we end on this one. Jim Rome stinks. What is your confidence on this offensive line group being ready to go against Texas? This is a fantastic question. Jim Rome stinks. Thank you. I think that it's a great question because this O-line, it's not just a total given that they're going to be really good right away or at all. Like maybe they're just pretty good all year. Maybe they have some speed bumps early on in the season, like any offensive line does, even like Michigan's offensive line did last year with a bunch of guys coming back. So I think it's a great question. The one thing, though, is that I think that you look at Texas and you say they don't have Tavondre Sweat and Byron Murphy and a lot of guys that they had last year on the front line. So Michigan's offensive line replacing a bunch of guys, but a big question for Texas is the D-line. So whoever, I guess, is ready quicker may be able to win that battle up front.
Yeah, Texas is going to be a tremendous, really good football team, likely a college football playoff team. I like them getting Texas in week 2 because, it's still a group that when you look at what they have up front, you have to replace Tavondre Sweat. You have to replace Byron Murphy. And everyone's going to kind of be figuring out what their identity is early in that season. And, Michigan, I think, has a chance to, I think that offensive line is the single most position group in that game if Michigan's going to win that game, because Michigan's able to control the line of scrimmage and kind of drag Texas into a bar fight. I think they probably win, which would be, an outstanding early signature win for Sharon Moore as the full-time head coach. We know he has 3 pretty big wins, really 4 pretty big wins as Michigan's head coach thus far, but talking about his standing moving forward. I think that's going to do it for us. Clayton, thank you for your time. Guys, be sure to like and subscribe. Like this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Use that promo code UM1 to get 2 months of premium access to the Wolverine for only $1. We will be back later this week to chat with you guys. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you again soon.